So one suggestion would be that BNDES should be allowed to have more flexibility on the use of those subsidized credit lines. So we saw how Brazil is one of the worst performers in the world in terms of the assessment of the quality and attractiveness of its tax system is compared to other emerging markets, but also developed markets. And that is a legacy of the many decades of fiscal boom and bust, ad hoc tinkering in the face of fiscal crises. So yeah, you have to do that. You have to do what you can when you're facing a crisis. But when the crisis is over, is the time to step back and think about a more broad, holistic, what do we want this fiscal framework to look like? And it is quite notable how that thinking seems to have been pretty stagnated over these past 5 years, which would have been the ideal time to be thinking about it. Oh, and on the transportation infrastructure, I mean, I've already made that point about how striking are the differences between Latin America and Asian emerging market economies, because I think one of Brazil's problems is not only that it's comparing itself to its past, but it's comparing itself to a mediocre region. It's doing well compared to Latin America, but Latin America isn't doing that well. It's doing much better than compared to its past, but against its potential, it's not doing brilliantly because a lot of Latin America suffers from the same infrastructure, tax, and public finance and education issues that Brazil also faces. And one suggestion in terms of thinking about the transportation infrastructure is there's a map in the report which strikingly shows the extent to which the deficiencies of the transportation infrastructure end up dividing Brazil into almost like separate little countries because the integration is so low between different parts of Brazil. So what that means is effectively the poorer regions are somehow supposed to have the ability to have the same technological capacity as the southern regions, which of course they don't. And what that means is that the poorer regions are going to remain dependent on fiscal transfers because they haven't got the infrastructure that might integrate them with other parts of Brazil and enable a more logical specialization between different regions. So one of the reasons for thinking harder about how to improve credit availability for smaller businesses is that then they'd be able to attract these young, better educated workers, and those young, better educated workers are more able to absorb the kind of on-the-job training that their more advanced stage of education compared to their older counterparts would enable them to raise productivity in the economy as a whole. By the way, one mystery to me, which is, I think it's fantastic, the way, particularly in contrast to Mexico, that Brazil has been able to grow formal employment over the past 3 years. I'm not entirely sure why. I think it's because the fiscal institutions and the institutions are generally stronger in Brazil, but it seems to me that there are a lot of disincentives still to being in the formal sector, so perhaps someone can tell me a bit more about that later. So we have, we're saying over the longer term upgrade the basic education system, but I'd like to qualify that. Over the longer term means really that these are changes that have a long lead time. They will take a long time to take effect. So actually what that means is that it's an immediate priority for this next government because we're only going to reap the benefits within the next decade. I mean, really what we have to consider is that a great part of Brazil's potential GDP 30 years from now has already been determined by the quality of infrastructure and basic education that we have now. And I think that's quite a sobering thought. So in terms of the external accounts, yes, we have improved through prudent management of the public finances or improved management of the public finances. This is something I want to come back to because yes, the public finances are no longer a risk to Brazil's macroeconomic stability. We didn't have the situation that we had in the past where an external shock was compounded by a public debt crisis. But let's remember that now Brazil's public finances are as good as they're going to get. They're not going to get any better from where they are now. And where's public investment? Maybe 2% of GDP, if that, but more like 1.5% of GDP. And this is an economy, as we know, with huge social needs, huge investment needs. And it's also an economy, I'll come back to this as well. One of Brazil's great advantages is this fantastically young economy. It means that for the next 10 years, the working age population is going to be growing more rapidly than the overall population. So the dependency rate is going to fall. So that's wonderful. That should be a productivity boom. Only if we're providing the skills, only if the economy is able to provide jobs to absorb those skills. But another sobering thought is, even though Brazil has these incredibly low dependency rates, because the old age population is very small compared to the rest of the population, it's actually similar to social security spending is actually similar as a share of GDP to developed economies with really old populations. Even through these fantastic, for Brazil, fiscal period of the past 5 years, there's been less than 2% of GDP in public investment. And in a sense, it will be easy-ish to sell to the private sector an interest in addressing some of the immediate infrastructural needs, but the government arguably really needs to be thinking more strategically about the fact that Brazil is currently this country of a continental size that's not very well integrated nationally. It's kind of crazy that a country of Brazil's proportions, most of the transport is by road. Hugely environmentally costly, but also costly of fuel and of road upkeep. Why not leveraging more the waterways in Brazil or the railways that could be used for different, roads and railways should be complementary, not competitive. The other thing, one thing that strikes you as well, also thinking about how important the South-South vision of integration with other emerging markets has been, and that is something that has come into its day, although a lot of people were very skeptical when Lula first came in with that idea. I think that has very much gathered respectability, but there you do have to ask, why is Brazil so poorly integrated with the rest of Latin America, for a start? That's something that's also true within other countries in Latin America, but I think it's one of the striking features.